Welcome to Episode 8 of the Fosgail Mindset. I'm your host, Myka Kennedy Stephens. In this special extended episode, I'm in conversation with Jessica Zairo, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at ByWater Solutions. We sat down on August 19th, 2025 to talk about how embracing the value of sharing can positively impact communities. Our conversation draws heavily on Jessica's experiences with open source software support and development, but don't be scared off if open source software for libraries is not your thing. As you listen, you'll be drawn in by her enthusiasm and optimism. Her care and compassion for libraries, education, communities, and sharing knowledge freely shines through as she talks about her experiences collaborating with Koha users and developers across the globe. I also would like for you to listen for her reference to co-opetition. Since my conversation with Jessie, I came across this word again in John Smart's book, Introduction to Foresight. In that book, Smart explains that humans who are most successful at working in groups tend to prioritize cooperation first and competition second. In other words, when we look out for each other first, and then focus on being the best or offering the most unique contribution, we find ourselves collectively heading toward a better outcome and a better future. That's co-opetition. And if you ask me, we could use a lot more of it in all parts of our lives and communities right now. Now, on with the interview. Hello, everyone. Today I am joined by library and open source enthusiast Jessica Zairo, Director of Library Sales and Outreach at ByWater Solutions. I know her as Jessie and will probably be referring to her as Jessie throughout this interview. I will say also that in this role, Jessie builds relationships with libraries and open source communities, provides leadership for sales and outreach teams, and encourages community involvement. Jessie's career is one dedicated to library and information services, having previously served as a member services coordinator at the Tampa Bay Library Consortium, coordinating services, special projects, and outreach for the 128 member libraries of that consortium. She started her library career working as an information manager at Everlove and Associates, where she provided legal reference and research services and negotiated electronic resource licenses. Welcome to the podcast, Jessie.
Myka, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here too, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation about open source solutions for libraries, and specifically Koha, which is the library system that you work on and that I also work with and that we both love dearly.
Very much.
So to get us started, I would really like to hear what initially drew you to this intersection of libraries and open source technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always loved helping people. I think that's my one true passion is, helping folks. And that's what really drew me to libraries. Libraries are built on, the concept of sharing resources, both physical and digital, with their community. This sharing really extends beyond just books and includes so many things like tools, technology, community spaces that fosters learning and collaboration. And when I started in my current position in 2015, I had this core belief that libraries were the center of community. I grew up going to libraries as a kiddo. I take my kiddos to the library, and now I have a position that brings it full circle, where helping libraries move to a technology solution that really fosters openness and sharing, the open source community. I believe this collaboration and sharing of code and ideas is exactly the foundation that libraries are built upon.
That is really well said, and I appreciate that you looped in sharing when you talk about community and you talk about the open source ethos. Because sharing is the theme that I'm wanting to highlight in our conversation today. And I think that's also a good segue too, in talking more specifically about Koha, right? So, Koha is an integrated library system that started in 2000.
We're celebrating 25 years this year.
Yeah, it's remarkable for open source projects to have that level of commitment and development over such a long
Yeah,
period of
yeah.
time. So, our listeners and viewers might not know, but the name Koha comes from the Maori word meaning a gift that's meant to be reciprocated. How do you see that philosophy of reciprocal giving resonate with your daily work and also in the library
Yeah.
community?
Koha has such a deep meaning. It's a significant aspect of the Maori culture, reflecting values like showing respect, generosity, and care. And that really resonates deeply with me. Right there is what we do every day as librarians. We are empathetic. We go the extra mile to help a user find what they're looking for. We share information, and most importantly, we give back to our community to make it stronger. And that's the gift. That's the work we do together to make a difference and make the community strong and share resources. That's what I truly love about Koha. The community is open, never, never, never hesitating to share. Every user feels welcome to attend meetings, participate in the future of the product, and really feel like they're contributing back. And I think that's what makes Koha so special.
Can you say a little bit more about that? How folks are encouraged to take part and engage and give back?
Absolutely. So I think one of the nicest things about the Koha community and being welcome is you can attend any meeting, whether it's a meeting for developers or just a general community meeting or a documentation meeting. It's open to anyone. Whether you're a current user of Koha or you're thinking about making a switch to use Koha, it's open to everybody. There's no closed doors. You can voice your opinions, you can talk with people, and it's truly inclusive. We also have a great resource called Bugzilla, which is a platform that allows us to track any type of enhancement or change or modification in the Koha system. So users and developers can see exactly what's coming down the pipeline so they know what to expect. They can also make comments on these features. So if you're using Koha and you have one too many clicks in a particular module that you want to see changed, you can make that heard. And so I love that piece of it that, as a user, I might not be able to write code, but I can contribute back through documentation or just giving feedback about the use of the product. And that's so special.
What's one example of sharing or collaboration in the Koha community that you've witnessed that perfectly embodies this spirit of reciprocal giving that the name represents?
We always joke that we have a co-opetition with other vendors in the Koha community because we work so closely together. And so one of my favorite things that we did was the implementation of an ERM. So in my past life, I started as a law librarian. So this one was kind of near and dear to my heart because I started my career with that. Koha did not have a dedicated ERM within the ILS for libraries. So if a library wanted something to manage their electronic resources, they would use Coral, which was a web-based open source ERM. It didn't really talk to Koha well, except for a few integrated pieces where you could see like a tab for a digital resource that you might have where you have the print resource in Koha. And then we could also see the vendors. So there wasn't too much integration. In 2022, BibLibre, which is a French open source provider, similar to what I do at ByWater Solutions, and OpenFifth, formerly PTFS Europe, which is a European open source provider, all work together to sponsor a developer to work full-time and build an ERM module in Koha. And why this is unique is generally developers are working on multiple things at a time. And BibLibre and OpenFifth and ByWater saw the need to make this move a little bit quicker because we wanted to provide this, resource for users. So it was first launched in the 2211 release, which means November 11 of 2022. And this improved the ERM functionality in Koha. And up to this release, we're still seeing enhancements being launched. And it streamlined the management, of course, for electronic resources for users. But what's so important is that resource that's being shared with all Koha users. So not just the libraries that are supported by those vendors, but every single library that uses Koha. Right there. I love that. I love that collaboration, the sharing, the idea of one becomes the resource of all.
And I love that word that you used at the start of that,
Mm-hmm.
co-opetition. That's a great word to describe that competitiveness, the
Yep.
cooperation, and it really kind of encapsulates that friendly collegiality that I've seen amongst a lot of the Koha support
Yeah.
companies across
Yeah,
the world.
it's truly about the relationships. I love working with all the different folks. Right now I'm sitting on the Acquisitions 2.0 working group, where we're building a structure and a framework of what the new acquisitions module will look like in Koha. And it's incredible because there's librarians from Germany and France and Montreal and a few of us here in the US, in the UK, and it's just great because we're all kind of sharing the way our libraries use the acquisitions module and ways we can make it better. So there's another example of, this collaborative nature, and working together.
So, a lot of folks, I hope, who will be listening to and watching this will already be familiar with you from your very popular Monday Minutes series. How many years has that been going
6.
on now?
Yeah.
6 years that you've been doing these weekly Monday Minutes videos that share very bite sized bits of information about Koha, how to use something in Koha, how to, some of the new features when we're getting ready for a new release. They're so approachable and friendly. They don't take up much time to watch, and they've been so useful to so many different people.
Yeah.
How does the act of sharing knowledge and best practices, like through Monday Minutes and through some of the other resources that you provide and what you do, how does that actually strengthen the entire open source
Yeah. Yeah.
ecosystem rather than just helping the individual libraries that are ByWater
Yeah.
partners?
Great question. So Kelly McElligott and I started Monday Minutes as a way to create short educational videos focused on Koha. So exactly what you said, those bite-sized videos. We looked at stats and we saw people were only watching the first 3 to 5 minutes of our videos. And we decided that that was the length we wanted to focus on. Generally, we try to provide like really practical tips and updates for the new release for Koha. So people, kind of get excited and see how to do things. Maybe we focus on one system preference or, one status or one feature. We'll demonstrate these and address like a lot of frequently asked questions. So if we see questions come in where people are saying, we don't understand how marking something claims returns works, we'll make that, and add that to Monday Minutes. So it's a great way where we both listen and we do proactive, teaching. Our goal is really to provide accessible and digestible learning materials, not only for our partners that we support, but as you mentioned, also for the Koha community. That's our Koha back to the community, documentation. So all users, no matter where you are, can watch, learn, and listen. And I'll never forget when I sat in my interview for my current role, Brendan Gallagher, who's our CEO, said to me, I really hold this message strong to my heart every day when I come to work, that documentation should be freely accessible, understandable, and easy to contribute to. And I truly believe that that fosters a collaborative environment where users can develop and learn together, contribute, and improve things. And I was fortunate enough to go to KohaCon in Finland 2 years ago. And I met Koha users from Turkey and India and all over the world. And they came up to Kelly and I and said, Monday Minutes helped us set up our library. I'm a standalone library. We share these with our librarians. And I was like, oh, Myka, if you could see, I have hair standing up on my arms. Like, that's the impact, right? We want this to not only help our users, but all users. That's Koha. That's our contribution back.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And I'm hearing in that a certain
Yeah.
fulfillment in being able to be useful, to serve libraries and librarians that are kind of beyond your direct circle
Yeah.
that you reach through your day-to-day work role. And yeah, I really feel the power of sharing
Yeah.
in that way. When we share our resources openly, whether it's, under open source licenses or through open access and Creative Commons
Yes.
licenses, or, whenever we make the content that we create open and available to a wider audience, the broader the impact it
Yeah.
can have.
I truly agree.
So, how do you balance the need to share enough information to empower users while also building that sustainable business model around support
Yeah.
services?
I think it ties into a little bit for our, philosophy of that education and documentation. I think we balance things out by creating really engaging content like tutorials or blog posts or videos that help our partners, but also educate potential users, community users, and also, of course, contributors. And that, again, really helps all different types of learners. Whether you're a visual learner and you like watching videos or you like step-by-step instructions, we try to hit all of those aspects when we're creating our content. And I think that's a good balance for people so they can learn on their own terms, or they can go find information to help them answer a question, whether or not, we're a support provider or not. I look at community documentation from Open Fifth or Equinox or Biblibre or Catalyst in New Zealand. Everyone puts out such great content. And I think that's, again, what makes Koha so great is we're all using the same product. So we can look at those documentation pieces that other users create and be able to, keep that balance of things that we've shared, things that they've shared to really maximize learning.
You've worked with libraries of all sizes and types throughout your career. What differences do you see in how smaller versus larger libraries approach sharing resources and knowledge within the open source community?
Another great question, Myka. Every library is different. And what's beautiful about the Koha community is no matter what size they are, might be a large system with 100 branches or a small one-room lending library, you can be part of the community. Some larger libraries have a dedicated developer on staff that can contribute to code. Let's take, for example, Brendan Lawler, who works for CLAMS, which is a consortium in Massachusetts, and Emily Lamcusa, who works in Montgomery County Libraries in Maryland. They contributed several patches for the most recent Koha 2505 release, and that was their Koha. Then you have folks like Gretchen Maxinier from Grove City College Library in Pennsylvania, and Amanda Campbell from Huntsville-Madison County Public Library, who tested patches for Koha. So they took that code that was submitted, tested it to make sure that, it works on the system and it works as expected, gave their feedback. Then we have folks that help keep the manual up to date, which is crucial for users to know exactly what they're looking for in the system, like Heather Hernandez from San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park Research Center, and Christy Kruger from Cuyahoga County, who helped update the manual. So no matter small or large, we're sharing resources, contributing back, and I think as librarians, we all share that belief that we want to help the community that we're a part of, whether it's in that physical brick and mortar and we're helping the patrons standing in front of us, or in this case, no matter how small or large we are, we can be a part of that community by, sharing those resources, whether it's a coder, a developer, a tester, or a documentation specialist.
Yeah, when I was a library director of a small library that migrated to
Yes.
Koha over 10 years ago, and we became an
Yep.
early adopter, and we we're a testing ground for Elasticsearch as well as a few other things. And I was always really thankful for our small size because it allowed us to be kind of a testing ground where risk was a kind of
Yeah.
low. If things went wrong, a few people would be inconvenienced. And yes, I would hear about it. But, by and large, we had just enough patrons. We had just enough items in our
Hmm.
collection, just enough records that it made it worthwhile to test out some of these things on that leading edge to be able to give back some good data. And so, yeah, it was kind of like, a small enough ship to be able to steer it through
Yeah.
rough waters if we encountered them, as opposed to being in a larger library where implementing any kind of change has to go through
Yeah.
3 levels of approval
Hmm.
process. So at the same time, the flip side of that is being in a smaller library does mean that you're often without those dedicated
Right.
staff people who their only job is to attend to the system, or to have those folks like you mentioned, like Brendan at Clams, whose their job is to work on
Yeah.
developments.
Yeah.
And, so it's not just developments that library or library system needs, but, can also contribute to the community. So yeah, so that it feels like there's some pros and
Yep.
cons with the size when it comes to
Yeah.
open source.
And listeners, I do want to say Myka is so humble. She is a trailblazer in the open source community. From day one that I met Myka, she never hesitated to help if we had a question, to ask her about what she was implementing at her library. She documented everything and shared it with the community. I remember when you did a presentation about EDS integration, and then another one when you did Open Athens integration. And those things stand out to me because you never hesitated to share what you did at your library so others could also implement it.
Well, I felt like it was the least I could do because, again, being pretty much a solo librarian, you rely on the experience of others, the wisdom of
Yeah.
others to help you do your own work in your
Yeah.
own library.
Yeah.
So I want to shift now a little bit. I've now left library
Mhm.
directorship, moved into the coaching and consulting space. And part of the consulting work that I have found and really love because it keeps me connected to the
Mhm.
Koha community is working with libraries that are migrating their library systems to Koha. I get pulled into these projects, just as an extra set
Mhm.
of hands. What I bring to these projects often is my perspective, the lens with which I kind of look at what's happening during migration. So, not just with the library system, but with the library itself, how the staff operates, what the workflows are, the different power dynamics and
Mhm.
relationships between, various committees and
Yep.
administration and the actual staff who are using the system at all the libraries. So I'm wondering, thinking
Mhm.
about sharing, for a lot of these libraries, they are moving from a
Yep.
proprietary system to Koha, which is open source. And, there's a different way of thinking and
Yeah.
relating to your
Yep.
software when you move into an open source solution. So, what are some of the mental
Mhm.
shifts that you've seen in the libraries that you work with when they're migrating to Koha? Those mental shifts that need to be made about sharing data, customizations to the software, workflow solutions, and how that kind of growing into becoming a part of the broader
Yeah.
community.
It's funny. I used to laugh and say that I was an ILS counselor in my early days because I would go out and go on site and work with these libraries to transition them most of the time from a proprietary system over to an open source ILS, Koha in this case, and supporting libraries in their switch and making them feel comfortable. And it is a real mental shift because you can see the source code, you can see the schema for Koha, so you can see how the whole structure is built. You can't see that with a proprietary system. You know, you can go out and see reports that are shared for all, Koha users, and you can go grab a copy of that and bring it in. And so there's a real shift of being able to share information freely in the community versus in proprietary systems where generally you have to ask a provider, to kind of help you with things or develop certain things. So I have found that I always think it's best to lead with a proactive and a positive approach, really embracing the change at your library, right? You're making this big switch. Let's make the best of it. So change isn't easy. I mean, in our day-to-day lives, we have to change things and it's never easy, no matter, what you're doing or what the size of your library is. And so I think one of Koha's strengths is the adaptability, easily allowing librarians and staff to adjust to, new circumstances or workflows, and then learning them and bringing them into Koha. And one of the things that we do is we help identify, some of the workflows or policies that they have at their library and how that will work and bring that into Koha. Also, reframing challenges to encourage individuals to view challenges as opportunities for growth and really fostering that positive mindset. So that's one way that I think, you can make that mental shift. I'm always about the positive and empathetic mindset. So I try to bring that to the broader change within the community.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, transition is so hard and it's so easy to want to rush straight through to get to the new thing. Yep. Like let's get rid of the old, let's just do the new, let's make it quick. And one of the things I really appreciated about my own migration process with ByWater and what I've tried to encourage the libraries that I'm working with who are going through migrations to do is to attend to that transition time period and making sure that you give enough time for that transition and that you involve everyone in that transition period as well. There's a tendency to want to shield or protect folks from a lot of the hard work that goes into preparing for a migration. But then I fear what winds up happening is you wait to bring folks in until like 2 weeks before go live or a month before go live. And that's not quite enough time for those folks to be able to wrap their head around what's going away with the old system and what they're going to be moving into with the new system. Much less to say, what happens with end users, right? When it's just all of a sudden you go to the library one day and the library catalog looks one way, and then you go to the library the next week and it's completely different.
Absolutely. And I'm going to agree with you 100% with involving all of your staff when you're making this, whether you create different groups or focus groups. Maybe you have a main implementation group and then others who are testers, but having your frontline staff, because they're using it every single day, be a part of that implementation is crucial for a successful, go live and moving over to a new ILS in this case. I agree with you 100%, Myka. Like that is where I see success when libraries include all of their staff. Whether it's maybe a Friday afternoon where staff can come and to open hours and ask questions, or maybe you have a form they can fill out and, ask questions, whatever it is, including them is really crucial.
Yeah, and I'm hearing in that kind of, again, this theme of sharing what's going on, sharing insights into the process, and just how important
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is.
absolutely.
So, as we brought up at the beginning, Koha is celebrating its 25th
Yeah,
anniversary
yes.
this year. And I think both of us are still aware of how
Hmm.
challenging it is to promote open source solutions for
Yep.
libraries. There's still a lot of
Hmm.
resistance, and we're still seeing a lot of the same
Uh-huh.
barriers. Do you think that some of the challenge about marketing open source solutions might reflect broader systemic and societal issues about how we share and communicate the value of collaborative work?
Nailed it, Micah, 100%. As a society, we don't freely share as much as we should, to encourage, that continuing education and making sure that people find exactly what they're looking for. As you've probably experienced with open source, there are a ton of myths out there due to its free and accessible nature. Whether people think the code isn't secure because everyone has access to it, or they need a full-time staff member to support open source software, there are always, challenges of effectively communicating and or marketing, the essence of open source software and the community that's around it. With all things, I try to look for positive attributes of the open source software that we support. And for me, that's the community engagement piece. I think that helps build trust for users. The Koha community has such a welcoming environment, as we talked about before, and it really recognizes its users and developers for their contributions. Within every Koha install, you can go to the About page and see all of the contributors for the code at any given time. You can go to the community website and see what people have contributed, both for code and documentation, people who have tested patches, and they just do such a great job really recognizing those folks. And that builds trust because you can see real users contributing back to the community. And I think that's the key for demonstrating the commitment to a strong community. Another factor is, building awareness and showcasing the value of a project, in this case, Koha, how users can share and foster collaborative work. So, attending those meetings where you see developers working together, every single day, users from, here in the US work with people in France and Germany and the UK and Australia and New Zealand, all over, just sharing information and testing each other's code, truly sharing that information. And I think the importance of showing off how multiple people have worked together on an enhancement or feature really brings people together. Routinely working with other vendors and users in the community, that's what we need to market. Users building a strong community.
That's beautiful. And I really like how you highlighted that trust element. Building relationships
Yep,
fosters that trust.
exactly.
And so, building that community, participating in that community, engaging with folks in the community, that's where you develop the relationships. And that's where the trust
Yeah,
grows from.
yeah. 100%. Look at us, Micah. We're not even working together really in a project right now, but here we are still sharing our love and passion of open source and getting people to believe we're marketing it without even knowing.
So, as we look ahead, what excites you the most about the potential for sharing and collaboration to address some of these really big challenges that are facing libraries today?
I'm sticking to our theme of resource sharing. This is a hot topic right now because a lot of libraries are losing funding for services like ILL.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crucial that we help facilitate options within the ILS to make these viable options for libraries while they face these cuts. Currently, Koha can implement an NSIP protocol, which facilitates the communication between Koha, the ILS, and the ILL product. Koha also has an internal ILL module within the system that can be used as a standalone ILL system. Or If your library has Koha and maybe your neighbor has Koha or the town over or the city over or somebody in your state has Koha, you can actually use a Koha to Koha ILL plugin, which in my eyes brings libraries together. Now they can share resources by talking to each other's ILS without the need for another third-party product, to share resources with their neighbors, community, or, a statewide system. And I think that's really the future, is watching this grow. There's a few libraries right now testing this within a few different states. I always say, like, when a feature comes out in Koha, it gets the job done. But there's always going to be ways to make it more efficient, have less clicks, bring better, integration with all the other modules within the system. Another key feature of open source is like getting users in there to test and give feedback, so they have real users saying, you know what, this would be a lot easier if I could just set, hey, click this email and send it to the library to let them know that I made that request. Or, hey, we need this library item for a presentation that we're doing, whatever it is. And I'm excited for the future of that Koha to Koha ILL resource sharing, because I think it's going to be a game changer.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I don't know if you remember, my library was an early
Yes.
adopter of the
Yep.
ILL module, although we were using
Yes.
Freeform ILL, which is now, I believe
Yes.
it's now defaulting
Yes.
comes
Yes.
with Koha. So you don't have to install it as a standalone backend anymore. But we were simply using it like on our side just to help us track and manage the ILL requests that came in from our patrons. And then we would still go out to our third party interlibrary loan network to actually place the request, get the item, all of that. But I remember when we implemented that, the Koha to Koha backend was there, it was available. And I was just wishing that there were enough libraries with similar collections to the very specialized collection that my library had, that, we could implement something like that. And that is exciting to hear, that there are finally enough libraries out there who are starting to use this and trying it out to be able to share resources directly with each other through Koha.
Yep. I remember. It's so exciting. I remember, Myka, when you first implemented that, because Kelly and I went to look at your form that you created, because we were like, oh, we need an example. Give back to the Koha community. Myka started it and shared it.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else that you would like to say about Koha and sharing and collaboration?
Yeah. I think I'll end by saying, community is my favorite thing of open source. And I'm sure you can tell by listening to, just some of my responses today. If you're looking to get involved, there's some great user groups out there. Right here in the US, we have Koha US, which is a great user group. There's different SIGs, they have general meetings. They have beautiful resources that they share for users to download, quick tips getting started. They do a bi-monthly video series that they share with all users. And then, of course, there's other user groups all over the world. So if you're listening internationally, just go to koha-community.org and you'll see a way to get involved. You can also attend those meetings, jump on Mattermost, which is the chat platform, and you can chat to users worldwide. So if you want to get involved, start the movement.
Thank you so much. And I will include all of those links in the show notes so that our listeners and viewers can check out those websites and those resources. I'll also include a link to your Monday Minutes videos so that folks can see you in action.
All right. Let's get that exposure out there for all users.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, Myka,
Jessie.
same. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I could sit here all day and talk about open source with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being
Bye-bye.
a guest. I hope you've enjoyed listening in on my conversation with Jessica Zairo. Do check the show notes for the links to the Koha community and Koha US that she mentioned. There's also a link to the Monday Minutes playlist on YouTube, or you can search for Monday Minutes and ByWater Solutions to see more from Jessie. If you'd like to stay connected with me and Fosgail, there are several ways to do that. You may sign up for our newsletter, Field Notes, if you've not done so already. You can find us on LinkedIn, and you might also consider joining the Fosgail community. It's a membership platform that provides a space for discussion, encouragement, inspiration, and support. We offer both free and paid memberships. Links to join the community and sign up for the newsletter are in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Fosgail Mindset. Please subscribe using your favorite podcast provider so that you can receive new episodes as I drop them. Until next time, I hope you find open possibilities.